Hello, everyone. Welcome to Code with Femi. It is amazing to be on another journey on a crash course series. In this actual series, we're going to be looking at ASP.NET Core MVC. Stay tuned. What is ASP.NET Core MVC? This is actually a rich framework, for actually building web apps and APIs, and it is actually an architectural pattern that developers actually adopt in able to come up with a way of how they've structured their code in a way that they've separated, the main components, which is your M, which stands for model, V, that stands for views, and C, that stands for controllers. So this actually helps you to be able to build up like robust systems. And the good thing about MVC is it's been around for some time now, and a lot of companies have adopted it, and it has really added a lot of value. I've actually used it for for different solutions on different projects, and I can tell you that it's really great for you to really know MVC. And in this actual crash course series, we're going to be looking at the ASP.NET Core 5.0, and the reason being, I know 6.0 is already out, but the reason why I would like to do the crash course on 5.0 is because there is actually a little bit of a change when you start doing MVC using ASP.NET Core 6.0, and I really don't want you to get confused, because most of the existing project we have even currently now still gonna be using that structure that we have in ASP.NET Core 5.0. Even myself, I still have some project that runs on ASP.NET 5.0. I have some running on 3.1, and they still ones and on 6. So yeah, but let's just jump straight into it and actually just have a look at what I have right in front of me. In here you can actually see that is actually an overview. This is actually the the Microsoft page. And before I actually do that, I would like to recognize one of the actual fan that actually inspired this. Sianda, he actually reached out to me and actually say, can we actually have something on MVC, just to show some sort of like a demo and go through a journey where we can have a live case scenario, and would actually get there. Hopefully we'll get there, but before we get there, I would like to actually make sure that we touch every important bits and pieces of MVC before we start going getting our hands dirty. But let's just go to this document. So thank you, Sienda. So this document here, you can see right there that we have this, which is your MVC pattern, which like I mentioned is an architectural pattern. And you can separate an application into three main groups of components. You have your models, views, and controllers. And you can see this actually helps you with the to achieve a separation of concern. You don't actually have your component doing too many things. You have just component that is actually focused on one particular thing, and as you can see, they actually work hand in hand. They work together. So if I would paint a picture here, your view would actually be what the actual users see. So like this page, this web page you see here, see it as your view, because that is what the user would see. And then you have your controller. So the controller is like like the intermediate between your model and your view. So this is what helps to integrate your model to your view. Your model in most cases should actually carry the actual logic. But there are some cases where you want to like come up with a much more solid structure in where you actually passing in some service into this controller and using that to to populate the actual model, putting data in the actual model, and that model is being passed into the view through the controller. So in here you can see the actual flow, which is really key. And I just want to see if we can actually look at just the responsibility before we start looking at the actual setting up. We're gonna set up from scratch and then we'll take it from there. But you can see here model responsibilities. The model view in an MVC represents the state of the application in any business logic or operations that should be performed by it. Business logic should be encapsulated in the model along with any implementation logic for persisting the state of the application. So you can actually see that these are all responsibility that has been split out. You can see right there, views are responsible for presenting content through the user interface. So this is what we see, and those views are actually being powered by the Razor View engine. So you would actually have, this is where you will see code files that has C# and as well as HTML markup. And also you can see right there we have the controller responsibility, which is basically controllers are the component that handles the user interaction, work with the model, ultimately select a view to render. So basically they serves like this integrator to make sure that things are flowing the way it should flow. And you just have to ensure that you bear this note in mind. You can see there, controllers shouldn't be overly complicated by too many responsibilities. You have to also remember the solid principle we touched on in the past videos, where single responsibility principle, where you should actually allow your model or your class to do just one thing, and that makes it easy for you to actually just ensure that you can scale up whenever you want to easily. So that is actually just for this. So let's actually like start up a new MVC app. Let's actually start it up. So I'm just gonna create a new project from here, and what I would do is I would just we'll just give it like a a simple name and all of that. But as you can see there, we have ASP.NET Core Web App Model View Controller. So that's what we want. We can actually just select that and actually click on next, and then we can keep this default. Don't really need to change it. Say next, and then that should bring us to the next page. And yeah, we just want to turn on the authentication type, because there is something I would like to show you guys here. But authentication actually means that for people to actually use your app, to be able to have access to some certain parts of the actual web app, they must sign in somehow. So the individual accounts would actually normally be your email and password, and then you have cases where you want to use like your cloud platform integration service, like your Azure AD, or you want to use Windows, which is like your Windows authentication. But for this, we're just going to keep it as default as individual accounts, and then we'll keep that as to configure to use HTTPS, which is to make sure that this actual web app is running on a secured connection. And then we have we can select that just to enable Razor runtime compilation, and then we click on create. And what this would do is this would actually just scaffold like a basic MVC application for us, where you can actually now start coming up with the actual shape and structure that you want based on the business rules, or what the project you're busy with, what it's all about. So just bear that in mind, that you would have to do that. But the starting point is actually just having this actual this scaffolded structure, and then we can actually start breaking things into different sections. And also for this actual video, like the main one I really want to like touch on and I'll be focusing on is, for now I really don't want to like, because I have a flow here. So what we're going to be focusing on in this actual video is we're going to be focusing on structure and configuration. That is the main focus here. So when I say structure, I mean like the folder structure, what stays where and all of that, and as well as your configuration, like how do you configure some of the things to make sure that your actual solution is running correctly. So let's go back to the actual app. So in this solution here, I will start with the structure. So with the structure, you can see that we have you have some folders in here, and the ones that are actually key here is the www root. We have the properties. So inside of the properties, you have your launch settings. So this launch settings, for instance, is something that one should be aware of, because especially when you're doing like your local development, you would need to be able to know what web server you want to use to run your application. And in here you can see we have couple of ones. We have this one, which is your IIS Express, right? And then we have the one we have one here which is for your Kestrel. This one uses the Kestrel, and I'm gonna just touch on the two quickly. So IIS Express is like your lightweight web server that runs on your machine, and it's actually used for development. And we can actually also check that up here on this actual link. I'll put all of this link in my description. Just make sure you check the description below. And here you can see IIS Express is a lightweight self-contained version of IIS optimized for developers. So IIS Express make it easy to use the most current version of IIS to develop and test your website. So this is you testing it within your machine before you compile it and deploy it to maybe your production server where it's gonna be hosted. So you can see here, and then we have Kestrel. So Kestrel is another one, but this is actually it's used in a cross-platform. So the two differences is that IIS Express only runs on Windows, but Kestrel runs on Linux. It runs on Windows. It runs on Mac as well. You can see okay, I said except this one. This one doesn't run on Mac, which is your HTTP/2, but it does still run on Mac. So we have so we can see here that they say here that this will be supported on a future release. Let's switch again to 5.0 because I just want to be sure I have the latest document. Okay, it still says the same thing there, which is fine. So there we can see Kestrel is supported on all platforms and versions that .NET Core supports. So you can see there. So it's actually like supported. So Kestrel is like your cross-platform web server for ASP.NET Core. If you want to run your code on any of these operating systems, you can easily run it. And here you can see in the actual code here that it says here that the template uses Kestrel by default. So when this actual method is called, which is your configure web host defaults, it actually is calling use Kestrel in the background. So you can see there. So let's actually go back to the code. There's one more that I didn't touch, which is your WSL. So this is actually like your subsystem of Linux for Linux, where you can actually run this on Linux from your from your actual Windows. So you need to install like the WSL software on your Windows, and then you can run this. But basically in most cases I actually make use of just the Kestrel, this one. So that name there, you can also change it if you feel like it's confusing. You can actually change it to Kestrel, yeah. And I want to believe that will change up there to Kestrel. You can see there right there. And also another thing you can actually see here, that if you right click on the actual project and go to properties, you will see there that you can also do exactly the same thing under your debug. You can see right there that you have those those information there. Let's see actually what you do if you click on new. So you can add new profile if you want to add more profile, but in here that's actually the structure for the properties. For the service dependency, It's actually just a dependency if you want to add some dependency to the actual project, but in most cases I don't really do things with this. The next one is your web www root. So this is where you put your static files, like your css, your javascripts, some of the images that you want to use or you want to display on your actual web app. So this is where you put all of those static files in here. It actually stays in here. Your static file stays in here. And if you have like even an HTML, you can actually like put it in here. So this is where you put in your static files, and then you have your areas. So your areas currently actually just have identity. So this identity is something that we're going to touch later in this crash course series. But on top of areas is just a way to segment your actual web app. So let's say for instance you have like an e-commerce site. You can actually like come in here to actually have different areas like your checkout, your billing, your order. You can have different section in there, like areas in there, and you can actually route your users to each of these different sections. So, and it actually really come in handy. It's really good if you can utilize it properly. And then the next one is actually the actual controller, like we mentioned, where you have it actually orchestrating. You passing it in a model in here and passing it into the view. So we're gonna actually like do some demo around that at the later stage as well, but I don't want to go too deep into this yet. So now we have your data, which is actually the actual data, your data migration. I've done my I think code first code first approach. You should actually go check that video. I'll try to link it in the description below as well, but in there you will see how to come up with migration for your DB. But this is actually just things that are related to your DB. So this is your DB context. If you want to speak to the database, you need a DB context. And then this actually uses entity framework core. And also you can actually see that it's all in there. But ideally what I do is I actually break this one out and put it in an infrastructure project, but we'll actually speak about this later. This is actually when you want to start doing something similar to like a clean architecture, where you want to start breaking all those things into modules, and you want to make sure that they are not tightly coupled to one another. And then you have your models, which is actually used for for data, and you have your views that actually the actual users see, so you can see their home. And also just bear in mind that your controller, when you have a controller name, let's say you have a controller name home controller, the actual folder structure should be it should match. So it should be home, because when you run the actual app and your user tries to go to this actual action, it would actually try to look for the view in this actual folder with that name home, and it's gonna go look for the index page there. So you just have to make sure that you structure your your views correctly to conform to what your controller has been set up to do. So just bear that in mind. And there's even some cases where you might want to put some pages in here in your shared folder, and it's still gonna you can still read it from there as well. But you just have to make sure that you have a proper structure of how your controllers actually know where to fetch your views. So just bear that in mind. And then we have like so for your shared, you have your layout. This is like your master page. So like this is your master page, and this render body is the section where you can actually now pass in the different pages that you have. So let's say for instance you have home. So for instance home can actually make use of this layout. So currently it's actually using it because I want to believe there is already a view start here. So you can see here that a layout has already been specified here. So for you to avoid not using a layout, if you want this to render by itself without plugging into the actual master page, which is plugging in into this section of the layout, then you would have to like explicitly say that your layout is null. yeah, somewhere here you just have to say layout, and then you can say no. So with that, it knows that okay, this is actually a page by itself. It's not using any layout page. But ideally, it's good to actually use layout page just to keep things, to 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 have this conformity. And then you can see, but in your layout, this is where you put things like your meta tags, or your HTML, your 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 your, your title, so your full HTML structure would actually be in your layout. And then just this section where you want to like pass in your pages, you can actually just call render body. And also you can also have like a section, so you can have different sections where you might want to like run a script that is not on this layout, just for a specific page. So index can have its own, can have a section here to say, sorry, I think I have to let's just change this to, nope, let's change this to that. And then in there you can just say section and call it script. And in there you can have your own custom script in here. So if you pass in a script in here and this actual home page is using that layout, then whenever the actual solution runs, it would actually pass in that script in here at runtime. So it would, it will recognize all of this on top. So it will run this as a like a one page. It's like you running one page, because when it runs at runtime, it will replace this with your index of that home, and also replace this with whatever script you've actually like structured here. And also you can have different types. You can come up with different types as you want. So you're not restricted. You can have different sections that you want to come up with by yourself, if you get what I mean. So you're not really, you can call this your name, you can call this code with Femi, and in there I can just say code with Femi, and that would be a section where things can be used and be passed in. And also this required means that if you say it's true, then that means any child page that is using this layout must make sure that they implement that section. So if you have true like this, so that means whatever child page that is using this layout, that means they must have a section called code with Femi. So you just have to bear that in mind as well. So that's actually it for for this. Also, let's just go down and see that we have the app settings. So the app settings is actually where you pass in your configuration that you want to change based on the environment you're dealing with. So currently we have this app settings, which is actually currently the main one. So this is actually the main one, and then you can now create one per environment. So currently when it runs locally, it's running in development mode, and I will show you that quickly. If you right click on this and go to properties, in there you will see ASP.NET Core environment. It's actually development. So this is actually the current environment we run. This can actually be changed to anything. You can change to production to say, this is actually now production. Then that means that this would not be called anymore. That means you might need to actually create a new file and call that ASP app settings.production.json. That would actually override this one based on the environment you're on. But let's just go back there, just take it back to development. Okay, so that's development. Back to development. And then also you can also change it here, so you're not limited. You can also change it there. You can see based on what web server you're using. So if you're using Kestrel, you change it there. If you're using IIS, you change it there. So you have that. And then we have your program. So program is something I've touched on in my past videos. I'm sure you guys have seen this before. I've told you guys main is the entry point. This actual ASP.NET Core MVC app is actually a console app. And if you right click on there, you will see, if you go to properties, you will see on the application, the description here tells you it's a console application, because it actually, like, when you compile it, it actually like produces DLLs and an executable file, a program that you can actually execute. So just bear that in mind. But the program is the entry point. So when you run this application, the first the first method that gets called is this. It comes in here and calls that method, which is this one, which fires up calls the kestrel, and then uses this startup class. So you can see here, this is your web host. So your web host, you can see specify the startup type to be used with by the web host. So your web host is going to be using startup class. So startup class is where we're going to spend a little bit more time on. So startup class is where you actually now start wiring up things for your actual application to run correctly. Okay, so let's say for instance your application needs to connect to the database. This is where you would have to register that to say that my application is going to use this database, and this is the actual way it's going to connect to the database. So currently now we have entity framework. That's how we connect into the database, and you can see here we have add DB context. We've got use SQL Server. Then this connection string you see in here that is actually being specified here is coming from this actual file. So connection string, default connection. Let's go back to the startup class. I'm just going to open class. Let's pin that there, and also let's pin this one there. So there, default connection, as you can see there. And like as I mentioned, you can override it. So let's say that you don't want to use this current connection string. You can actually literally copy that and actually paste that in here and change the value that you have here to whatever you want to use. And at runtime, when you run this, then it would not use it won't use this one anymore. It would not use this. It will override this one and use the one in the development app settings JSON file. Then other things that we have here is like things like setting up some of these things for making sure that your app is running correctly. Exceptions. So this is actually, you can see right there where it says that this captures database related exceptions that can be resolved by using entity framework migrations. So it captures those exceptions for you and actually like present it as an HTML. And also we actually have like your identity setup here, or identity user, where you can actually like set up some of the things that you're expecting the user. So in terms of identity, we're going to touch on that later, but for now it's just this is where we just register this. Okay, this is the identity we're using, and also this is the application store we're going to use. So I'm actually a fan of actually just splitting out my security from my normal database. So you just have to make the decision if you want to keep it together, but I think it's much more better to just keep it separate, because your security database should only just store security things, and then you have like a normal database that handles all the data related to the business or to the domain. And if for instance the business database is compromised, at least you know that your security database is still safe. So yeah, okay. Then we go further to this section, which is your middleware section as well, where you have different middlewares. This is actually the middleware for displaying exceptions, like your stack trace and all this detailed exception when you are in development mode. You can see there, if environment is development, then show the full exception error, the actual developer. But on production, you don't want to do that. You want to show a friendly message to say there is a problem here, please contact administrator. And then we have use migration endpoints. So you have the use migration endpoint, which is actually used to you can read there as well, process request to execute migrations operations. The middleware will listen for requests made to migrations endpoint options .default path. You can see there. And then we have your exception handler. So this is actually just going to show an error page if it's not in development mode. and then you have HSTS is actually just to make sure that we're using a secure line. And then we have HTTPS redirection as well, which is enforcing that whenever someone goes to HTTP your domain, then it redirects them to HTTPS, :// www.yourname.com. So then you have your static files, making sure that MVC actually allows the usage of static files. And then you have your routing. So routing is one thing that also, like, you should actually bear in mind. This is actually crucial, because this is how your users can be able to access your pages. Because through the routing, this is how when they go through a URL, they are being routed to an actual view. That is how they know where to go. So this has to be set up. So these are it's been set up. So all of these ones that you see, these middlewares are actually like inbuilt middlewares. These are things that are actually part of the the framework. It's not like I came up with it. It's actually there, and we just utilize it. And there are cases where you might want to come up with your own custom one. You can actually do that, and I'll actually show you that as well at some point. So we have the user authentication, and then we have use authorization. And then we have, so use authentication is actually to say that this actual app is going to authenticate the users. And then we have use authorization, which means that we're going to authorize the users. So authentication, authorization. So authentication is, who is this user? Who are you? And then that is where you provide your email and password. And so, okay, I think I know you. And then authorization is, what are you? Like, what role do you play? Are you an admin, or are you an editor, or are you a cashier, or whatever, whatever role you are in this actual project. So that's what authorization plays out. It actually authorizes you to use specific resources within the space. And then we have your use endpoint. So this is where we configure a pattern to say that this is actually how the URL would be configured. And whenever a user goes to that URL, this is where they would go. So you can see right here that we have controller, action, and then the parameter. So in a case where someone goes to your domain, maybe /home, it would actually just go straight to index if, for instance, these are not supplied, because that's the default here. This is what we've actually mentioned as default. So like that. So this is actually just a pattern to make sure that your user is using the right URL to actually bridge to connect to the different pages you've got. And you can even change this and say that you want them to say MVC or code first, code with Femi. You can have anything you want at this point. You can actually like ask them to say my name, / the controller action, and that actually also conforms to to that controller to say, okay, if you say home, then like you say index, then definitely you go in there. So basically it's just a way to make sure that you have the right endpoints configured for your users to be able to know how to navigate to the different pages that you've got in the solution. So that's actually just that's actually what that does. And then you have your map eraser pages where you are mapping the endpoint to a eraser page. And all of these things are something that you can also read up on. I'll put in the link on here, because every of this information I'm also sharing, you can actually read up on it. It's actually very important that you also like familiarize yourself with it, so that as we go along as well, it's easy for you to understand what I'm doing. So that actually concludes this. In the next one that we're going to be touching on, we're going to be diving deep into, let's go there. We're going to be diving deep into middleware. That will be what we're going to actually start looking at, how we can actually configure our own middleware, Like, why do we need a middleware? Like, what value, what role does it play? And we would actually, start doing, some of those things and see how it actually plays out. So I'll see you in my next video. Keep well.